Today's session is all about digital data security. Now, this might not be a topic, the title of which inspires you, motivates you, or gets you very excited at all, but it is a really, really crucial topic that we need to be thinking about consciously, mindfully, to integrate into our digital marketing and broader even marketing plans. And there are many, many reasons for this. It will be a topic that will encourage you to go deep into how you store, how you manage, and how you integrate data in its broadest sense into the rest of your organization in a really positive way that can enhance the brand, can give you competitive advantage if you're in a commercial setting, and is just a really good, wholesome way of doing business. So those are some of the topics that we're going to go deep into as we go through this particular session. Now, there are some very, very key regulations and legislations that we need to be focusing on as we talk about this topic. And I'm going to figure those out with you first before we go deep into some of the marketing benefits around the concept of data security. So the first one is to really be thinking about some of the more traditional regulations and legislation. First one, which probably would spring to everybody's mind, is the Data Protection Act. The latest version of the DPA is from 2018, and this is a very UK specific one, which basically takes over from any of the previous acts that we've all followed for many, many years to protect the data of our organizations, the data of our customers, and the people that we serve. And the big difference with the Data Protection Act 2018 was that it gave our customers the rights over their own data. And it sets out principles for the way that we should be holding the data, and also then releasing that information transparently to our customers upon their request. And of course, for really using this data for very specific purposes. And that's a key thing here. The intention as to why you're holding data, you need to be able to evidence. So in other words, if you're holding data for your customers that is not really in keeping with the kind of products or services that you offer them, then the big question would be, well, why are you holding that data? So it is all about data that is held specifically for the purposes of adding value to the customer experience or serving them with product or service after they've transacted with you. Holding any other data that you cannot, even though you might lawfully be able to do it, but that you cannot justify as being important to serving that customer, would potentially come into question around the Data Protection Act. So be holding data, be really looking after, be keeping data secure that enables you to serve at a high level the customers that you have. That's really key. Another one which came to real public prominence in about, I would say, probably that's 10 years ago now, was GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Again, applies in the UK as it does across the EU. And this is something that is really introducing penalties, if you like, for any kind of breaches to what you are meant to be and what you're obliged to be doing in terms of customer data. Now, the big key difference between this and Data Protection Act was the whole idea that consent is critical. Now, there are opportunities for you to do a little more than completely consented marketing, but I'll talk about that in a little while. But consent here is absolutely critical. So you need in your organization to make it very, very clear before capturing and processing any other data that is around your customers' records, is that you have the consent to hold that data. And it has to be not just implied consent, it has to be actual consent. In other words, you need evidence that you have gathered that data with the consent of your customer. Now, there are some exceptions, and the big one is this phrase, legitimate interest. If you can show evidence and proof that by sending a communication to a particular individual, even though they haven't yet given you consent to receive that information, if you can prove and show that it is of legitimate interest to them because of the kind of product or service or the kind of communication that you've already had with them, there is this implied consent that goes along with it, because they will have a legitimate interest in this kind of extension out beyond the formal GDPR kind of ring fencing, I guess you could say, of the data that you're holding. But do take care. Legitimate interest is a little bit of flexibility within GDPR. But if you want to stay squeaky clean and absolutely in line with GDPR, then legitimate interest should really be replaced by actual evidenced consent. So what have we seen so far? Well, it's about releasing data that you hold to your customers on their request. And it's also about making sure you're only holding data that the customer has originally given you consent for. So those are very, very key things. There's also the PECR, which is Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulation. And this relates to the electronic communication, so things like marketing calls, texts, emails. And this establishes rules around things like cookies and tracking and the typical kind of electronic marketing strategies you might have, for instance, through your website. This, of course, then starts to introduce this whole idea of making sure that you have very, very legally sound data protection and consent formalities and policies within your website and made publicly available. And this is where you see maybe in the footer of a website or maybe on a legal or policy page of the website, some very, very, very clear guidelines and principles that are part of your brand guidelines, part of the way that you do business. So you're being very open and authentic about the principles that you adhere to when you're communicating with customers and maybe with prospects as well. And this is one that comes into this whole kind of awareness stage of the customer journey if you're a marketer, because one of the things that you'll be looking to do is to communicate with people who are not yet customers. So people who are not already giving you the consent because you've transacted with them to having these communications from you. So the PECR basically says that really what you need to be doing is making sure that you are very, very compliant with the guidelines and the regulations that they've stated if you're looking to do what we might term prospecting. So that is marketing to people who are not yet customers. So take great care to understand those particular regulations. And I'll give you some links to all of these things later. There is also, we're not covering these in any great detail today, but there's also the Advertising Standards Authority's ASA guidelines. So if you're an advertiser in the UK, you need to be compliant with those. And the general principle behind the ASA guidelines is all about honesty and truth and not trying to mislead in any way, shape or form through your advertising. And again, the ASA website will give you a lot more detail around those. Now, there are some combined places where you can go. One of the very, very good places to go for further assistance as a really good source of information is the Government's Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO. Now, if you are data protection regulated, or if you are doing active marketing, somebody within your organization should register with the ICO. And this is UK's independent regulator for data protection, and they do have a whole range of different guides and resources and tools that can help you to become compliant and right and form policies around suitable regulation, compliance and writing the kind of guidelines that will apply to everybody who communicates within your organization. One of the key resources that they have is the ICO's Guide to GDPR. And that is one that is made publicly available to marketers. Now, there is a data protection fee, and most organizations that process personal data should be paying this data protection fee unless they're exempt. There are some types of organizations who are exempt from this. And if you're not doing active marketing, or you're a micro organization, maybe a not-for-profit or a charity, different fee structures apply. But for most organizations of any kind of size or structure, you should be registered if you're processing customer data with the ICO. So go to ico.org.uk and more details can be found on their website. There's also, extending this out a little bit further, the National Cybersecurity Centre, the NCSC, and in terms of actually the storage of information, the more kind of IT element of things, because we've been talking very much more from a commercial sort of marketing angle at this stage. But if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about how to secure the information, so the kinds of platforms, the kinds of serving and storage of data, whether or not, again, because of the kinds of customers that you serve, maybe the servers and the archives that you have should be within the UK. A lot of customers, if you're working in B2B now, are asking for their data to be held securely within the UK and not at overseas locations. So lots of nuances there in terms of the best practice and how to serve customer needs like that through your cybersecurity. So if you go to ncsc.gov.uk, that will give you a lot of resources again. And also the one that's really, really interesting is the cybersecurity training for staff. So there's a whole range of different programs that you can register for there. And they will give you an opportunity to benchmark where you are right now in terms of your compliance, but also, and this is the really key thing within this conversation, is that you show best intent for becoming compliant. This is something that has always been at the heart of things like Data Protection Act and GDPR, is that if you can be seen to be, and you can evidence that you are on a journey towards full compliance, that often, if you do find that there are some loopholes that you've fallen outside of, that can often protect you. If you're showing diligence and due concern for constant and continuous improvement in your data security, then that can often get over some of the hurdles if you are and when you are challenged. There are also obviously consultancies and lawyers around all of this kind of data protection policy and structure. So if you need any specialist legal advice on data protection, how to become compliant, etc., then it is best to consult with a specialist and an expert to help you construct that. So let's just say now that you've started the journey of this, you might already have something in place. How is this going to play out then for you as a marketer or as a commercial person, rather than somebody who is, specifically tasked with actually holding the data? Well, the first thing, of course, is that it's vital to see this as an ongoing process. This is not something you do one time. A lot of the data protection regulations and a lot of the guidance has and will continue to evolve over time. So conduct regular checkups, the websites that we've been talking about, consult with professionals, consult with specialists, and make sure that you are keeping close to the changes that happen. You don't necessarily need to become a specialist yourself, but make sure that you are adhering to the concept of continuous improvement here. So have a plan, even if it is a micro plan, for how you are going to continuously improve all this stuff, because it's really important to be able to evidence the fact that you just didn't do it one time and then you said, hey, we're compliant, and then you just left it to the will of the gods to keep you compliant into the future. That simply will not happen. So you have to be consciously making improvements constantly, day by day. So let's get a little bit deeper then into the commercial practicalities of this. What is data security? Why is it so important? And really, why does it become a commercial benefit to us if we do it? So we can kind of see this as a little bit more than just a stick that can come and beat us. It is actually a carrot as well. So there is a bit of a carrot and stick kind of duality here. It can become a very, very positive thing for you if you can figure out how best to do this. So let's think about the impact on people, on product, on process, and also potentially on promotion. Let's consider the effects on our customers and our broader stakeholders, and think about how we can integrate this whole concept of data security into being compliant, but also managing the risk of getting it wrong, but positively, how we can introduce it into our marketing communications. So we've kind of looked at some of the resources so far, but let's go a little bit deeper now into some of the things that we can do and maybe consider some of the angles that we can take to begin this journey for ourselves. So if you were thinking about building a bit of a plan, obviously now you know where you can go and tap into some of the resources, you know where you can go and get some guidance and learn about what is important. But now I'm going to take you step by step through the various building blocks that you need to be thinking about if you're going to build a simple plan to move forward in this. Now, and this of course applies, as I said right at the start, to you as much if you've already got a policy, if you've already got some compliance statements. This is about the continuous improvement element, so it applies to you. But if this is your first step into this world, doing this kind of activity, then this will apply to you because it can give you that planned structure that you can then go away and start to fill the boxes in. So what is digital data security? So let's start with a bit of a definition because it's going to be important to know actually what we're probably talking about here. So this is basically a comprehensive set of policies, procedures, and technological measures, okay, that are implemented to safeguard digital information from unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration, or destruction. It ensures the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data as it is stored, transmitted, or processed. Now, there's a big definition for you there. So let's unpick this. This is what we're talking about here. So it's a comprehensive set of policies, procedures, and technological measures. Okay, so we need to state what is our policy here. And we need to kind of put this within our brand guidelines. Why do we want digital data security within our organization? So what is our policy for this? What is our intention? What is our strategic position with the data that we hold? Because this is strategic information. It's probably now with the demise of third-party cookies, this first-party data, the data that we own about our customers and our stakeholders is like gold dust. So we really need policies here to really protect it and look after it strategically into the future. So what are the procedures that we need to put around that for capturing the data, for holding the data, and for using the data? Now, of course, this is where I say that people, not just the platforms, are also important. So let's start to think about the procedures that we want for capturing, holding, and then using the data. 3 things within that word procedures. And then the technological measures implemented to safeguard this digital information. So where we're going to hold it, what kind of access we're going to give to this data, who is going to be the custodian of this data, who are going to be the users of this data, who are going to be the people who are going to check this data, are going to refresh it and cleanse this data, because of course any data holding is constantly going out of date from any moment that you capture it, because email addresses change, people move house, your customer leaves its job, the direct customer that you have leave their job, and somebody else comes in. So the data is constantly evolving and changing. So your policies, procedures, and the holding of that data, you need to have a process, you need to have a system in place that enables you to keep that data cleansed, up to date, and very confidentially held. And also, as the definition goes on, to permit authorized access, but obviously prevent unauthorized access. So it has to be safe. There have to be security sort of procedures in place to hold that data safe, but also to release that data or disclose that data to appropriate parties. That could be law enforcement, or it could be that customer's data needs to be released to that customer because they've requested it. And also policies and procedures there to alter the data, but also to not lose the data because of the way it's been held. So access, disclosure, alteration, or destruction prevention are going to be key as part of your policies. So these are kind of checklists of things to think about. And by this point, I'm sure you're probably thinking, okay, well, this is beyond me. This is beyond my pay grade, or this is beyond the breadth of control I have in the organization. And the answer would be probably yes. Unless you are the data controller for your organization, the chances are you are going to need support and assistance from others. So this would be, okay, who do I need to talk to safeguard? Who do I need to talk to about the technology? Who do I need to talk to about striking out the principles and the policies and the procedures? Who do I need to talk about for how and where we're going to hold this data? It's going to take conversations and collaboration. So you can see what we're uncovering here is this quite complex web of interactions and policies and procedures. It's not easy stuff to do, but at least by understanding where the checkpoints are to get this thing comprehensive, and that was the key word at the start of the definition, that's going to be key for you. And so what we're looking to do here is to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the confidentiality of the data, only releasing the kinds of data to the people who are going to be needing to use that data for express purposes. So for example, if customer service needs certain blocks of data, but they don't need other types of data, you only release that data to them. The rest of the data they don't need, so you don't release it to them. And again, for marketing or for sales, they only need the data that they need. So the policies and the procedures need to protect the confidentiality of data and the data holding, because every piece of data is a piece of data in its own right. It isn't necessarily of equal value to everybody. So the confidentiality of the data applies internally as well as externally. The integrity of the data, that's a key word here. How much integrity does that data have? How timely is that data? How quickly is that data going to go out of date and will need to be refreshed? And how are you going to refresh that data? Is that you have somebody responsible for data cleansing? All of these things need to be borne in mind. And of course, the availability of the data by the way that it's stored, the way that it's transmitted, or the way that it's processed needs to come into this mix. So let's just say the phrase, it's complicated, does spring to mind, but it doesn't have to be too daunting. These are checklists that you can use to start to build some of the gaps. And of course, for all of us, we all have gaps. So this continuous improvement thing is really important to consider. But let's just take a little kind of pause here, because why do we need to do this? Yes, okay, there's regulation and legislation, which kind of is the big stick going to beat us if we get it wrong. But there has to be a commercial reason for wanting to do this, doesn't there? Otherwise, our backs are against the wall and we're trying to be, come away from a defensive position. Well, let's look at some of the potential upsides of this, because there are some really great upsides when it comes to data and getting this stuff right. So what is going to be the impact on people? Well, there's a positive energy here that you can say, well, there's a positive training and awareness amongst the staff over the importance of how they protect customer information, how they kind of honor really and respect that customer information. So there's a good opportunity here for building this kind of subject into training and personal development. Yes, at induction and onboarding, but all the way through somebody's career within the organization. They need to be refreshed. They need to have this kind of step-by-step opportunity to really be putting this customer first. Also because, of course, the impact on people is the level of customer trust and perception of your organization. That is great for brand building. If you are seen as both compliant, but also, really proactive in the way that you use your customers' data, it has an opportunity here to be one of those elements that builds brand value. So customers will trust you more. Your trust score will go up. The customer satisfaction will go up. And maybe even the perception of how you are to deal with will be improved. And the impact on people, of course, is across the roles and responsibilities within the organization. It's unlikely in a medium or small size organization that you have a dedicated data controller. So somebody's going to have this as part of their role. And that might be you in marketing, but it could be somebody else. It could be somebody in IT, but it could also be somebody else commercially within the organization. But everybody has a role and a responsibility to protect and be the custodian, even if it's custodian with a lowercase c, of your customers' data. So helping people to understand that is really, really important. The impact on product, how does that come to play? Well, security features and the way that you use customer data and then serve that data back out in terms of your marketing communication could be a real differentiator. Maybe the way that you inform your new product development using the right kind of data, and the data kind of intelligence that you can glean from doing deep analysis on how your customers use certain types of product or service. You look deep into that, you analyze it, you evaluate it, and then you serve that back into your new product development or innovation life cycles. And if you can do that, what you're doing is you're actually being very customer driven, very customer led, and that can be really important. It can also give you an opportunity to maybe glean some real proprietary information. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to, be protecting the IP that you gain from doing this kind of real deep use of data in terms of your differentiation of your products and services. So something that really potentially then, if you're in a commercial organization, can give you a true competitive edge. So that also could be interesting. Now, the impact on profit can be quite curious here. The impact on process can be very, very curious. Implementing secure processes and protocols is really, really key. So part of this is going to be, as I mentioned earlier, regularly auditing and regularly checking, not just where you are, but doing these kind of spot checks on the data itself, but the data as well as the actual process. The data and the process, as well as the people who are using that data. Regular audits and checks are really key. And again, if you integrate that as part of the systems and processes that you're making within your policies, so that you are both stating compliance, but these audits and checks enable you to show evidence that you're continuously improving your compliance position. This is something you can publish, you can make public how and when you do your audits and checks. And again, that's a great confidence builder, not only internally, but also externally. And all of these things can come onto the fourth P, which is promotion. You could, if you choose to, use messaging around security and data security in your marketing campaigns. Maybe you can address public data breaches or vulnerabilities in a really proactive way. So rather than feeling that data is a very kind of defensive subject, maybe you can be on the front foot and address any kind of challenges that you might face in the future with a really positive PR stance. And because you've been doing those regular audits and checks, you always have that data and evidence to fall back on if challenged. And if you can use this as part of your promotion, as part of your brand positioning, you can build a reputation for data safety. And let's face it, if a brand, when you're kind of buying a product or service from another organization, if a brand is very, very clearly taking, great efforts to look after your data as a customer, so this is you being a customer for a minute, how does that make you feel? Well, it makes you feel quite confident in that you're in safe hands, and that's key. So if you can be doing this back, imagine how your stakeholders, your customers are going to feel. So that's really important. So what kind of effects will this have? Well, effects on the customers will be, hopefully, an importance of the trust in the brand-customer relationship. So you can use this strategically and tactically to really elevate the level of trust that you have. Because if you're looking to build professional intimacy with your customers, well, what a great way of building trust to say, look, you're in safe hands, I'm looking after you. If you can then sort of, see the customer expectations regarding data privacy and play those things back in the communications that you have, then you have an opportunity to be talking at the level that your customers are expecting. And then, as you feed back and use your communication channels to play back what you're doing with the data that you hold for a particular customer or group of customers or customer persona, then what you're doing is you're using those channels and that feedback to deliver beyond the expectations and really make a firm sort of position and stake in the ground that says, we are doing things to the very best of our ability. We are compliant to the letter of the law, but we're actually going a few steps beyond that because from our perspective, you, customer, are so important to us. And this is not just you saying it. It's not just that kind of blowing in the wind, hot air kind of marketing. It's actually evidence-based and you can back it up. So it becomes something that's really quite interesting to be trading with when it comes to communications. And the broader effects on stakeholders. Think about your responsibility to your shareholders, to your investors. Think about your responsibility to your senior management. If you can be positioning all of this at the right kind of level with the right kind of updates and knowledge and evidence, again, we're still talking evidence-based, then what you're doing is you're actually positioning this to build the confidence within your value chain. And that goes upwards as well as downwards. So you're protecting all of your stakeholder data and interests. You're actually thinking about your third-party vendors, your partners, your buyers, your resellers, your wholesalers, your suppliers. Everybody involved in your value chain has a part to play in the data security. They may well be using or needing certain data that you have, or they may well be the recipients of your activities here. They might learn from you good practice, best practice, world-class practice. So sharing how you're doing this with your stakeholders broadly across your value chain, again, can be a great confidence builder. And if you're doing it better than anybody else in your industry, well, what a great opportunity to really share the most professional company, the most reliable brand, the most data secure organization I can deal with is these guys. Well, where else would I want to go? Yeah, they've got great products and services, but wow, do they look after us? They are just technically sound behind the scenes. There's this lovely kind of security of feeling that actually comes with that as well. So I would certainly recommend that you consider those two effects, the effects on customers, but also the broader stakeholders, because that's going to be key. So what are the things that you can do here then? Well, obviously you need to sort of be making a big, significant list of the importance in compliance of the UK regulations, and also really visit, if you're looking to sell this internally within your organization, to get the support to build maybe a little mini project team to kind of address this, or to review where you are if you've already started doing it. Also integrate there the consequences of non-compliance. This is, just by the nature of the topic, this is, as I mentioned before, the carrot and stick. So yeah, there's some really, really great sort of positive stuff, but there is also some potentially risk stuff that you need to be managing. So look at the consequences of non-compliance, list out those things, as well as an overview of the regulations and actually the positives on the flip side. So you're kind of doing a SWOT analysis, if you like, of not only where you are, but what is really important. So you can prioritize to you in your organization where to start first. And one of the questions, and I used the word there for the first time, which is risk. One of the questions that is undoubtedly going to come through very, very quickly is, how will this help us to manage risk in our business? And certainly data security and compliance goes hand in hand with risk management. Again, it's one of those topics that most people don't want to go to. It's one of those topics that you kind of feel maybe is a bit of a negative, but actually having a risk strategy, so that if something happens, if the worst occurs, you've at least got a plan B that you can open up and start to run with. So identifying and assessing the risks around not only your data and your compliance, but more broadly, is just great marketing strategic business practice. Okay, so identify, we're talking about data security here. So identify just within your data as a starting point, Where are the risks? Where are the gaps? What is it? What is it that we don't know? So I've got this checklist of things, and we've been onto these various regulator websites, and we kind of know some of the things that we should be doing, but I don't even know where to start here, because look, there's a point here that we're looking to need to tick off, and I don't know who does this. I don't even know if we've got a system for that. Well, there is identification of a risk. So you've got to assess when you see these gaps, and we're talking gaps at this stage, early in the process. When you see these gaps, make an assessment, make a judgment. Maybe you give it a red, amber, green, or maybe you give it a 1 to 10 rating, where 10 is absolutely mission critical. 1 is, yeah, I'll do it when a rainy day happens. Somewhere between the 1 and 10, or the green and the red, somewhere between those things is going to be the score. So identify and assess the risks that you have. And then for each one, particularly the highest priority ones, you need to get some kind of mitigation strategy. In other words, okay, there's a big risk here. There's a big gap here. So what is our mitigation strategy? What are we going to do next to try and overcome it? Who do I need to get around me to solve this challenge? I think of it as a little bit of a detective exercise. So, you're presented with this kind of scene, and you're going in to gather all the evidence and then evaluate and see what you on the other side. Start to think of this really strategically, and the tactics will fall out of it. So if you think of this, rather than going in at the fine detail, think of the bigger picture. If you can manage the big picture, the other stuff becomes more obvious. If you go in at the fine level of detail and say, oh, look, this is all the little details here, I'm not really quite sure, you can often get lost in the granular level of detail. And think as well about the role of insurance and crisis management. These are two other concepts that come into data compliance and risk management. Are you insured? And how are you insured? Should you be insured? Could you be insured for these kinds of risks? You need to do some research. Every organization is different, but just think about, could we actually mitigate the risk by just taking out insurance? You'd still have to be showing best practice in terms of your intentions. You can't just insure everything and think, oh, it's not my responsibility. It's actually the opposite, because to make a claim off insurance, you need to be able to evidence the reality of what happened in a really transparent and honest way. So you still have to have everything that we've been talking about in place to have something to talk through. But actually the role of insurance could plug some of the gaps, maybe. And certainly crisis management. What happens if? And take the whole principle of crisis management and learn some crisis management tools and procedures for what if the worst goes wrong with this? What if our whole data processing system goes down and we can't access any of our data? What happens then? Well, that is a bit of a crisis. If you can't serve customers, are you going to be out of business on that day? So looking at this as a real strategic level is vitally important. So those can be some things to think about. And hopefully, if you're still with me and you haven't actually been too frightened and run off at the thought of all these things, then we're still in this game. And remember, these are gaps that you can welcome. So just think, I need to plug these gaps. They might not be things I know right now, but just my intention to think about these gaps and to want to plug them is at least the first step in the journey. And then you can back that up with the importance of the marketing communications around this procedure and these policies that you're looking to start. And you need to be really transparent. I've used this word transparent as much as I can in this, because if you're transparent around communicating the data practices that you have, the policies that you've set up, your intentions, the plans that you have, your strategic intent for the future, then you are generally covered in the journey that you're on. And if you do have, for instance, a PR crisis related to any kind of data breach, you need to understand that as long as you can, take a deep breath, revert back to standard crisis management processes and be reliant on the fact that you have some stated aims here, that you are not perfect as an organization, and you hold your hands up and you say, look, we are doing our best. It wasn't good enough in that regard, but we're doing our best and we are working now to resolve that issue. Most of these problems go away. The problems come in data breaches when Organizations shut up shop, they close doors, they don't communicate, they are not being seen as transparent because the world's view from the outside is, so what else are they covering up? And of course, then you're opening up the doors to even bigger challenges and issues. So transparency, as far as you can commercially allow, is a really key trick to moving this one forward. And utilizing secure channels for marketing communications. Wherever you can, make sure you are documenting and keeping really, really safe all of the processes, all of the meetings, all of the systems, all of the decisions that you're making, both internally, but where you need to externally with other stakeholders, making sure all of that stuff is held in a reliable, secure way so that you can refer back to it if you need it, when you need it, and release that kind of information to the people who need to know. So not everybody needs to know everything. So part of your planning here is to decide who needs to know what, when do they need to know it, and for what purposes. Who needs to be making the decisions? Why is it them, not other people? And who needs to be the recipient of those decisions? And so this is taking some really careful planning. So it's almost like a strategic data security plan within your strategic marketing plan. But if you view it that way, then it opens up a really nice way to manage this going forward. And remember, from the day one, from the get-go, perfection is not needed. As long as intention and documenting of the evidence of the journey is there, that's the key. So to wrap up, hopefully you're still with me on this checklist, building this plan. Still want to do this. Hopefully you are. But the three key takeaways that I'd like you to leave with, just really as the overarching kind of themes as we've been talking through here, is that the centrality of data security in today's digital landscape is paramount. Data security in whatever form of marketing you're doing is key. You cannot do social media. You cannot build a website and data capture. You cannot be sending emails. You cannot pick up the phone to somebody and not think you've got a data security compliance responsibility, because the answer is you have, even if you didn't realize it before. So it's central to everything that you do. So we need, not we want, we need to take this seriously. So hopefully some of these tips and ideas and processes are getting you started on this. Takeaway two is the interconnected impact of different areas of marketing. You know, we've jumped about a little bit here. We've talked about stakeholders. We've talked about customers. We've talked about processes and where you're going to hold your data. We've talked about who's going to be accessing it. It is all interconnected. So if you need to create some mind maps of how all of these interconnected people, processes, systems, etc., are all connected, then that is a good idea, because a visual route map, a visual guide to how these things are going to impact on each other can be a great way of getting everyone around the table and saying, look, this thing is complicated. It might even be complicated as a big ball of spaghetti. And what we need to do is start to unpick it so we can see who's connected to who, what needs to be connected to what. And we need to take some quality time to try and unpick this so we really deeply understand it. So the interconnected nature of it is important to understand and not to get scared of. Just knowing it's there, but knowing that you can unpick it with the help of others is key. And the final point really is the legal and ethical imperative to prioritize data security within your thinking. Communications and marketing is not just about the creative and the lovely front end of how great your last video clip was, or the wonderful creative that you used on your email shot, or the lovely leaflet or flyer that you just published and printed. This is really at the heart of this. This is the stuff that sits behind it. And there is a legal, okay, there's a key word here, a legal imperative as well as an ethical imperative to be doing that creative side of marketing in the right way. I've used the word wholesome. This is about being authentic as a marketer and knowing that marketing, yes, is about being creative and looking good, but it's also about being and doing good. And that's the real key point here when it comes to digital data security. This is the stuff that powers underneath the surface of that tip of the iceberg, the stuff above the water that everybody sees. This is the great solid foundation and baseline. under which all of your marketing is founded. So good luck trying to plot it out. Good luck trying to figure it out. Hopefully some of those resources that I've shared with you, some of those places where you can find more data, more information, tutorials and assets and materials to help you on your journey. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of an insight and an indication of some of the steps that you can take and some of the questions that you're going to need to answer to empower yourself on the topic of digital data security.